The resignation letter sat on the mahogany desk, bleeding ink into the heavy stock paper. It was a simple 2-sentence document that carried the weight of a death warrant. For 6 years, Elena Marsh had cleaned the blood off Damien Voss's hands, kept his ledgers flawless, and ignored the lingering heat in his dark gaze. But an engagement ring on another woman's finger was a line she wouldn't cross. She grabbed her coat. The heavy deadbolt clicked shut behind her. The bass from the ballroom 3 floors down vibrated through the soles of Elena's sensible leather pumps. It was a steady, rhythmic thrum, the heartbeat of the Voss family's most triumphant night. Down there, champagne flowed in crystal flutes, and politicians rubbed elbows with men who buried bodies in concrete. Up here, the air was dead. Elena stood in the center of Damien's office. The room smelled of old paper, scotch, and the faint coppery tang of the gun oil he used on his pistol. She liked this room. For 6 years it had been her sanctuary and her war room. She knew which floorboards creaked. She knew the combination to the wall safe, hidden behind the bleak abstract painting Damien hated, but kept because his late mother had bought it. She knew exactly how many unrecorded burner phones sat in the bottom left drawer of the desk. She knew everything about him. Everything, except how it would feel to watch him slide a 5-carat diamond onto Sabine Lockhart's finger. Elena stared at her own hands. They were clean, manicured in a neutral polish that wouldn't draw attention. They didn't shake. She had trained the tremor out of them 4 years ago, right after she'd had to stitch a gash across Damien's ribs in the back of a speeding sedan. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Emotion was a liability. She walked to the desk. The resignation letter was already printed. She'd drafted it 4 days ago, the moment the rumor of an alliance with the Lockhart family hardened into fact. The merger required a marriage. Damien, the pragmatic new head of the organization, never hesitated. He traded vows for territory. It was business, and Elena was just an employee. She set the single sheet squarely on his leather blotter. 2 sentences, effective immediately. I am resigning my position. The encrypted ledgers are in the safe. No apologies, no 2 weeks' notice. You didn't give 2 weeks to a syndicate. You either disappeared or you were disappeared. Elena had spent the last 2 days systematically wiping her digital footprint, closing her off-book accounts, and arranging a new identity through a contact in Halifax who owed her a favor. A bag sat in the trunk of her car. She just needed to walk out the door. She reached for the crystal tumbler on the side table and poured 2 fingers of the whiskey he kept for himself. She drank it neat. It burned a path down her throat, settling like a warm knot in her stomach. 6 years ago she'd started as a numbers girl, laundering cash through storefronts on the east side. Damien had pulled her out of the basement the day he noticed she could spot a skimming operation faster than a forensic accountant. She became his shadow. When a shipment went missing, Elena found it. When a lieutenant got greedy, Elena found the evidence that led to his quiet, permanent retirement. She'd managed his life with a ruthless efficiency bordering on devotion, and somewhere in the middle of it, she'd fallen in love with him. It was a quiet, pathetic secret, a rot beneath the floorboards of her professionalism. She set the empty glass down with a soft clink, smoothed the front of her black dress, and picked up her coat. The brass doorknob was cool under her palm. She turned it. The door pushed back. Elena stepped back as the heavy oak door swung inward. Damien stood in the frame. He filled the space, broad-shouldered and immaculate in a charcoal tuxedo that cost more than her car, his bow tie hanging undone. The top buttons of his shirt were open, revealing a glimpse of dark ink along his collarbone. He didn't look like a groom celebrating his engagement. He looked like a wolf that had caught the scent of blood in the snow, his eyes locked on her coat, then her bag, then finally on the white sheet of paper resting on his desk. The silence stretched, pulled taut until it hummed. Damien stepped fully into the room, reached back, and shut the door. The deadbolt clicked into place like a gavel dropping. Going somewhere, his voice was gravel and smoke. My shift is over, she said, and her voice didn't waver. She was proud of that. I left the paperwork on your desk. He didn't look at the desk again. He walked toward her, unhurried, with the deliberate, terrifying grace of a predator that knows every exit is sealed. Downstairs, Damien said, stopping 3 feet away. The alderman is toasting my future. My fiancé is holding court with the wives of men who'd put a bullet in my skull if they saw an opening. I came up here for a minute of quiet. He tilted his head. And I find you wearing a coat. It's raining. You hate the rain. You usually wait it out on the sofa. Sometimes you fall asleep. He took another half step. The scent of his cologne, cedar and smoke, cut through the stale air. So I'll ask again. Where are you going? Away, Damien. She used his first name. She rarely did. It was always Mr. Voss in front of others. Boss when they worked alone. Damien was reserved for the moments after the bleeding stopped, when the adrenaline crashed. His jaw tightened. He stepped around her to the desk, picked up the paper, and held it without reading it, just stared at the crisp black ink. Then he crumpled it slowly in his fist. The sound was agonizingly loud in the quiet office. He tossed the ball into the brass waste bin. It landed with a hollow thud. Declined, he said. Elena's spine went rigid. It's not a request. It's a notification. You don't notify me of your departure. You work for me, Elena. You don't leave until I say you leave, and I haven't said it. The family protocol states that anyone without a blood oath can sever employment, provided they leave assets and knowledge intact. I've encrypted the files. I've surrendered my keys. I'm walking out with nothing but the clothes on my back. The protocol. Damien's voice cracked like a whip, the calm cracking with it. You think this is about a handbook? You think I care about encryption keys? Then what is it about? Elena shot back, her own composure finally splitting. You have what you need. You have the Lockhart docs. You have the political cover. You have a beautiful wife who'll smile for cameras and give you airs. What possible use do you have for a shadow? He crossed the distance in 2 strides. She held her ground, forcing herself not to retreat as his shadow fell over her. You think you're just a shadow? He murmured. I know exactly what I am. I'm the woman who cleans the mess. I schedule the payoffs. I scrub the evidence. I lie to the agents at the door. I'm an operative. But my operation here is finished. It's not finished. She's wearing your ring. The words spilled out before she could stop them. They tasted like bile. Damien went completely still. For a long second, the only sound was the distant thump of bass from the ballroom below. Slowly, he reached out, cupping her jaw, his thumb brushing the tear she refused to shed. His touch burned against her cold skin. Is that what this is? He asked softly. You're running because of Sabine. I'm resigning, Elena corrected, her voice trembling despite herself. She tried to pull away. His grip tightened. Not enough to hurt, enough to hold. The marriage is a contract, Damien said, tracing her jaw. A piece of paper, same as the one you tried to leave on my desk. It changes nothing between us. She let out a bitter laugh. It changes everything. I won't be your mistress, Damien. I won't stand in the corner of your house managing your affairs while your wife picks out curtains. I have too much pride for that, and frankly too much sense. Mistress. He tasted the word like poison. Don't insult yourself, and don't insult me. You run this organization as much as I do. Without you, the whole thing bleeds out in a week. Then find a tourniquet. She grabbed his wrist and peeled his hand from her face, her skin raw where he'd touched her. She stepped around him toward the door. Before her fingers reached the brass, his hand slammed flat against the wood beside her head. Damien was flush against her back, trapping her between his body and the oak. You don't get it, he whispered against her ear. There is no severance for you, Elena. No quiet exit. You know my secrets. You know exactly how broken I am. I'll never tell a soul, she breathed. You know I wouldn't. I know, which is exactly why I'll burn this city down before I let you walk out of it. You are mine. You have always been mine. I'm not. A tear finally slipped free. You chose her. I chose power so I could protect you. Damien spun her around, pinning her shoulders against the door, his eyes wild. The Lockharts were moving in with backing we couldn't match. If I refused the merger, it was war. A war we'd lose. A war where you'd be the first target. I made a play to hold the board. And you made me a spectator, Elena retorted. You didn't consult me. I found out about the engagement when the invoice for the ring crossed my desk. I paid for it out of the reserve fund. Do you know what that felt like? Damien flinched. He dropped his hands, running one aggressively through his hair. I couldn't tell you. he muttered. Because if I looked you in the eye and said I had to marry another woman to keep us alive, I wouldn't have gone through with it. I'd have put a bullet in Lockhart's head and damned us all. Elena stared at him. He wasn't lying. He never lied to her. He'd traded his freedom for their survival, but it wasn't enough. It couldn't be enough. "Unlock the door, Damien," she said softly. "Let me go." The vulnerability vanished, replaced by the hardened mask of the underboss. "No. If you walk out that door, I will have my men stop your car before it reaches the highway. I'll drag you back in zip ties if I have to. You're the only real thing in my life, Elena. I'm not letting you go." He stepped past her and unlocked the deadbolt himself, then paused at the threshold. "Fix your face," he said, tone sliding back into command. "Wipe the transfer to Halifax. Then come downstairs. We have a party to host." He walked out, leaving the door open. Elena stood frozen against the wood, listening to his footsteps fade down the hall. She was a master of finding the exit in any scenario, but looking at the open doorway, she understood the terrifying truth. There wasn't one. The ballroom was a gilded cage of chandeliers and hypocrisy. 300 of the city's most dangerous and influential people milled across the marble floor, pretending to be civilized. A string quartet played somewhere beneath the low roar of laughter and threats disguised as small talk. Elena stood in her usual spot, the shadow of a marble pillar near the east exit, a tablet in one hand and an earpiece tucked beneath her hair. She was a ghost at the feast, her black dress a stark contrast to the silks and diamonds around her. "Slight issue at the valet, Miss Marsh," came the voice of Nico, head of security. "The councilman's had too much gin, and he's arguing about a scratch on his car." "Send Dean out," Elena murmured. "Offer a complimentary detail and slip an envelope into his pocket. If he argues, remind him his wife thinks he's at a planning retreat. Copy that. Crisis averted." It was instinct, even shattered into pieces. Elena did her job flawlessly. She looked toward the center of the room. Damien was holding court, magnificent, smiling with his mouth but not his eyes, shaking hands with men who had plotted his death a month ago. Clinging to his arm was Sabine Lockhart, old money elegance Elena, who had clawed her way up from nothing, could never replicate. On Sabine's finger, the diamond caught the chandelier's light and flashed. Elena felt an ache, sharp and localized. She looked down at her tablet, trying to anchor herself to the data. "Don't look." But she looked. Damien's eyes cut through the crowd and locked directly onto her. 50 feet of distance. The look struck like a blow. Possessive, unyielding. A silent echo of the war they'd just fought upstairs. "Miss Marsh?" She turned. A man in a sharp navy suit stood beside her, holding 2 glasses of champagne, the kind of symmetrical, handsome face that belonged to actors or federal agents. "Julian Reyes," he said, smiling, "with the Lockhart party. I'm told you're the one who actually runs things around here." "I'm Mr. Voss's executive assistant," Elena said, her guard instantly up. "I handle logistics. How can I help you, Mr. Reyes?" "You could take this drink, for starters. You look like you're carrying the weight of the world over here in the corner." "I'm working." "No alcohol, thank you." He stepped a fraction closer, dropping the party guest register. "You're exceptionally good at your job, Elena. I read the files. The way you restructured the Voss supply routes after the port seizure last year. Brilliant." Elena's blood ran cold. That restructure was buried under 3 layers of shell companies. No one outside Damien and 2 dead men knew the details. "I don't know what you're referring to," she said evenly. "We run a legitimate logistics company." Julian chuckled. "Of course you do. Just like this marriage is a grand love story." He glanced toward Damien and Sabine. "It's a beautiful piece of theater. But theaters burn down, Elena, especially when the leading man is distracted by his executive assistant." "If you have a point, make it." "I have a party to run." "My point," Julian murmured, close enough that she caught peppermint on his breath, "is that the Lockharts aren't joining the Voss family to share power. They're joining to hollow it out from the inside. Damien thinks he secured a truce. He just let the horse through the gate. And when it happens, a smart woman shouldn't be standing on the wrong side of the board." He slipped a matte black card into her tablet case. "When you're ready to actually quit, call that number. We could use a woman with your talents." He melted into the crowd before she could respond. Elena stared at the space where he'd stood, heart hammering. The Lockharts weren't allied. They were planning a takeover. And they knew about her. Elena. The voice in her earpiece wasn't Nico. It was Damien. He'd commandeered the channel. Across the room, he'd detached himself from Sabine's hand with a firm gesture, his eyes locked on her, dark, furious. He'd seen the exchange with Julian. He hadn't heard the words, but a predator recognizes another predator sniffing at its territory. My office. 5 minutes. Elena pressed her lapel mic and looked at the man who'd trapped her, the man she loved, walking blindly into a slaughter. She touched the edge of the black card hidden in her case. "Copy that," she whispered. The office door clicked shut behind her. Damien stood at the window, jacket discarded over a chair, sleeves rolled to his elbows, staring at the city lights. He hadn't turned around. Who was he? His voice was terrifyingly calm. The tone he used right before ordering a warehouse burned to its foundation. "Julian Reyes," Elena said flatly. "Came with the Lockhart party. He knew exactly who I am and what I'd do for you." Damien turned. "And what did he want?" "He wanted to recruit me." Damien crossed the rug in 3 strides, stopping inches away. "He touched you." "I saw him lean in. I saw you let him. I was assessing a threat. I'll tell you what I'm angry about." He set his glass down hard, whiskey sloshing over the rim. 30 minutes after you tried to walk out on me, a rival operator is whispering in your ear." Elena pulled the matte black card from her case and dropped it beside the spilled liquor. "He didn't just offer me a job," she said, voice turning clinical. "He offered me a lifeboat. They're going to move on you, Damien. The merger is a front." Damien stared at the card, the possessive fury in his posture fractured, replaced by the ice-cold calculation of a man who'd survived his father's purges. "What exactly did he say?" "He called the marriage a horse at the gate. He said the Lockharts weren't here to share power. They're here to hollow it out, and they wanted me on their side before it happened." Damien stepped back, dragging a hand through his hair, eyes narrowing at the wall's safe, his mind visibly racing. "If Reyes knows you're the linchpin, then Marcus Lockhart knows. Which means they're not just planning a hit, they're mapping the infrastructure. They want the roots, the judges on the payroll. They want the throne intact." "Why didn't you take it?" Damien's question caught her off guard. "The offer. You wanted out. You hate this marriage. Reyes handed you a golden ticket to watch me fall and walk away clean." Elena looked at the spilled scotch. She thought of the years bent over ledgers, the nights monitoring scanners to keep his shipments safe, the way his hand felt on her waist. "Because I built this with you," she said, her voice carrying absolute iron. "I scrubbed the rot out of your father's books. I structured every shell company. I hold the keys. They don't get to take my work, Damien. And they don't get to take you." A heavy silence fell. Damien stepped forward again. No anger this time. He wrapped a hand around the back of her neck and rested his forehead against hers. "Then we burn them," he whispered. "All of them." "We need proof," Elena breathed. "If you move on Marcus Lockhart without cause, the commission turns on you. You'll violate the truce." "Find it," Damien ordered. "Rip their operation apart. Track the money. Find the flaw." "And Sabine? If she's part of it, she goes down with her father." Elena pulled back, the knot in her chest loosening a fraction. It wasn't a cancellation. It was a stay of execution. "I'll need full access to the wedding accounts," she said, heading for the door. "Every vendor, every invoice." "You have it," Damien said. Elena unlocked the deadbolt. She didn't look back. The war had started, and she finally had a target. The Voss data center was a nondescript warehouse in the industrial district, a failing printing supplier on the outside, a fortified server farm humming with illegal traffic inside. Elena sat in the glow of 3 monitors. It was 3 in the morning. She'd slept 4 hours in 3 days. A cold cup of coffee sat untouched by her hand. She'd audited the wedding. The Lockharts had insisted on handling catering, florals, and perimeter security. A gesture of goodwill, they called it. Elena pulled the invoice for Northgate event security, the firm Sabine had personally recommended for the ceremony perimeter. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, running the routing numbers through a proprietary algorithm she'd built 3 years ago. The trace went from a bank in the city to a holding company registered offshore, then dispersed within 12 hours into 3 shell LLCs. She pulled the articles of incorporation. The registered agent for all 3 was a man named Walter Combs. Elena picked up her encrypted phone, hit speed dial. Nico. Run a name. Walter Combs. Not local databases, federal registries. 40 seconds of clicking on the other end. Got him. Walter Combs, disbarred attorney currently consulting for a federal task force. He handles asset restructuring for cooperating parties. He's a handler, Elena. A federal ghost. Elena's blood went cold. It wasn't just a takeover. It was a federal operation. The Lockharts weren't building an inside track for Voss soldiers. They were building an inside track for wiretaps and informants. Northgate Event Security would place federal assets inside the perimeter of Damien's own wedding. And Sabine. Elena pulled the email logs. Make sure Northgate handles the inner sanctum. Damien prefers privacy. I want their best men on his personal suite. Sabine wasn't a pawn. She was the architect, deliberately positioning federal assets around Damien. Elena grabbed her coat and dialed Damien's secure line as she moved down the corridor. Voicemail. She dialed Dean. Voicemail. Cold panic pierced her chest. Damien never went dark without telling her. She pulled up the GPS on his armored sedan. The dot blinked at Harbor Row, the old shipyards. He was supposed to be in a routine sit-down with the dockworkers' union. Union men didn't meet at 3:30 a.m. Eleanor broke into a run. Fog rolled thick off the harbor, muting the sodium lights to sickly halos. Damien stood beside the open trunk of his sedan, staring at empty duffel bags. They didn't show, Dean said, hand resting on his holster. Union guys are greedy, boss, but they ain't late when there's cash on the table. Damien's instincts screamed. The silence wasn't empty. It was holding its breath. Get in the car, he said quietly. Drop the trunk. We're leaving. The first bullet took Dean in the shoulder, spinning him like a top. The crack of a rifle rolled across the corrugated steel a fraction of a second later. Down! Damien roared, dragging Dean behind the engine block as automatic fire tore through the asphalt where they'd stood. Rounds slammed into the armored sedan, spiderwebbing the glass. 3 shooters on the crane catwalks to the east, 2 advancing on foot from the west. A kill box. Keys, Damien barked. Dean, pale and gasping, tossed the fob. Damien popped the door, but the angle was wrong. If he moved to the wheel, he was dead. Tires screamed. The black sedan tore around a container stack, smashing through a wooden barricade and fishtailing to a stop between the shooters and Damien's position. The passenger door kicked open. Get in! Elena screamed. Damien hauled Dean up by the belt and shoved him into the back seat. Bullets sparked off the frame. This car wasn't armored. The rear window shattered inward. Damien threw himself into the passenger seat, and before his door shut, Elena slammed it into reverse, spun a violent J-turn, and shot forward down the narrow alley between the container rows. They're federal, Elena yelled over the roar of the engine and Dean's groans. The Lockharts are informants. The whole merger is a sting. They moved up the timeline because I started pulling the shell data. You drove into a crossfire in a soft car, Damien said, strangely calm despite the adrenaline. You weren't answering your phone. She killed the headlights and navigated by moonlight through the fog, hit 70 on the service road, burst through a chain-link gate, and tore out onto the deserted highway before flipping the lights back on. The silence in the bullet-riddled car was heavy, broken only by wind through the shattered rear window. Damien turned to look at her, glass in her hair, a thin cut bleeding slowly on her cheek. She'd just saved his life. Not from a desk, not with a spreadsheet. Pull over, he said quietly. We need to get Dean to the clinic. He's stable. Pull over, Elena. Now. She eased onto the gravel shoulder beneath a flickering overpass light and put the car in park, leaving the engine running. Her hands dropped from the wheel, shaking violently. Damien reached across the console and took them in his own blood-stained hands, holding them still. You're an idiot, she whispered. You walked right into it. I did. He brushed the cut on her cheek. And you came and got me. I told you. You're my boss. I manage the assets. Shut up. He kissed her, desperate, bruising, tasting of copper and cordite. 5 years of restrained tension, shattered by the brutal reality of their world. When he finally pulled back, he kept his forehead against hers. The engagement is over, he murmured. The truce is dead. We go to war. Elena opened her eyes. The fear was gone, burned away. Good, she whispered. Let's kill them all. The clinic smelled of bleach, iron, and stale coffee. A converted dental office beneath a shuttered laundromat reached through a freight elevator that groaned under its own weight. Dean lay unconscious on the steel table, while Dr. Ferro, a former trauma surgeon who'd lost his license a decade ago to a painkiller habit, worked in silence. Elena stood at the sink, scrubbing violently at her hands, watching pink water swirl down the drain. It wasn't her blood. It was Dean's. It felt like it was seeping into her skin anyway. You're taking off a layer of skin. Damien stepped up behind her and stopped the frantic scrubbing, taking the brush from her grip. He pumped soap into his palm and began, slowly, methodically, to wash her hands himself, working it between her fingers over her knuckles. Dean will live, he said quietly. Ferro stopped the bleed. He's lucky, Elena corrected, staring at their intertwined hands under the water. They had us dead to rights, Damien, if I hadn't traced the shells when I did. But you did. You always do. He turned her to face him, exhaustion carved under his cheekbones, still ignoring the blood on his own cuffs. The engagement was a strategy to prevent a war. The war is here. The strategy is obsolete. So how do we win? She asked. Marcus Lockhart is a protected federal asset. If you kill him, the task force descends on this city like a plague. We don't have the capital to survive a federal siege. A slow, vicious smile curved Damien's mouth. I'm not going to kill Marcus Lockhart, he said. You are. Elena blinked. I'm not an assassin, Damien. I don't need an assassin. I need an architect. He leaned in. Lockhart's value to the task force is his access. He's supposed to deliver our routes and the cartel's supply lines. But an informant is only useful if he's breathing. And he's only breathing because the cartel doesn't know he's an informant. Elena's mind caught the thread instantly. If the cartel finds out Lockhart's working with the feds, they won't wait for a hearing. They'll butcher him. The task force loses its star witness. The case against us collapses before it reaches a judge. Exactly. You have the routing numbers. You have Combs's file. You have the digital footprint of his betrayal. I can package it, Elena said, the plan already assembling in her head. Encrypt the payload, distribute it to cartel contacts across the border, make it look like a leak from inside the task force. How long? She checked the clock. 4:15 a.m. 2 hours. I need a sterile terminal and a hardline that bypasses the local network. The house on 9th, Damien said, shifting instantly into command, off the grid. And you? Julian, Reyes, and Sabine are at the Lockhart estate in the hills, waiting for the call confirming I died at the harbor. I'm going to deliver the news in person. Reyes is dangerous. He's trained. So am I. Damien checked his magazine and holstered it, then paused at the door. The boss vanished for a fraction of a second, leaving only the man who'd kissed her in a bullet-riddled car. Don't miss Elena? Burn his files to ash. Don't die, Damien, she replied. I'm not training a new boss. The house on 9th was a brutalist concrete unit with no heat and no furniture, but a fiber line spliced directly into the city's main trunk. Elena sat cross-legged on the cold floor, the glow of her laptop the only light. Outside, the sky bled from black to bruised purple. She wasn't just hacking. She was performing digital surgery. She'd found a back door into Combs's asset management portal buried in the offshore tax filings. Bureaucratic security, tight but predictable. She didn't breach the firewall. She slid beneath it through the accounting software. File accessed. Lockhartum C4471. Download initiated. A progress bar crawled. Sweat beaded at her hairline in the freezing room. If a monitor caught the spike, they'd sever the connection and Lockhart's deal would stay locked in the vault. 70%, 85%, 99%. Complete. She exhaled. Transcripts naming distribution routes. a signed statement detailing shipping lanes, the full anatomy of a betrayal bearing Marcus Lockhart's signature. She compiled it into an encrypted folder, attached an anonymous message translated into flawless Spanish, and routed it to the private servers used by the cartel's intelligence arm. Once she pressed enter, Marcus Lockhart was a dead man. Not a quiet death, a public one, a message. She thought of the bullet in Dean's shoulder, the sniper fire inches from Damien's skull. Her finger came down. Her finger came down. Few miles away in the hills, the iron gates of the Lockhart estate were locked and guarded. Damien didn't bother with the gates. He moved through the pine trees at the rear of the property like a shadow, neutralizing two guards with suppressed shots before they heard the leaves crunch. He bypassed the terrace lock with a scrambler Elena had built him a year ago. The house was dead quiet. He reached the double doors of Marcus Lockhart's study, a sliver of light bleeding beneath them, and kicked them open. The wood splintered around the lock. Julian Reyes stood at the desk, phone pressed to his ear. Sabine sat on a velvet sofa, still in her ivory gown, a glass of champagne in her hand. She screamed, dropping the glass. Julian's hand flew to his holster. Damien didn't hesitate. 2 shots, one to the shoulder, spinning Julian violently, one to the knee, dropping him screaming to the hardwood. "Damien, please," Sabine shrieked, pressing into the sofa corner. "It was my father. I didn't know." Damien didn't look at her. He stood over Julian. "You missed." Julian spat through blood. "You're a dead man, Castell." He caught himself. Teeth gritted through the pain. "Voss, the task force is already rolling. Kill me, you kill an undercover asset. They'll bury you." Damien pulled out his phone, dialed, and dropped it onto Julian's chest on speaker. "Elena. The package delivered?" Her voice, calm and exhausted, echoed through the speaker. "Confirmed receipt on the other end." "It's done, Damien. Lockhart's file is in cartel hands." Julian went still, color draining from his face. "No. You couldn't have breached that server." "She can do anything," Damien said, looking down at him with disgust. "Your star witness is being hunted by men who don't do subpoenas. Your case is dead, and you're trespassing in my city." He drove his boot into Julian's shattered knee. Julian blacked out. Damien turned to Sabine, trembling, hands raised. "Take the ring off," he said. She scrambled to pull the diamond over her knuckle and threw it to the floor, where it rolled to a stop near Julian's blood. "Pack a bag," Damien said, turning for the shattered doors. "If you or your father are within city limits by sunrise, I won't need to kill you. The cartel will." He walked into the cool morning air, the sky breaking open gold and pale blue over the horizon. The organization belonged to him again, but the throne didn't feel lonely anymore. 2 days later, the Voss office was quiet. The bullet holes in the armored sedan had been repaired. The federal task force, quietly dissolved after Marcus Lockhart was found dead in a border town motel, a casualty of cartel retribution. Desperate to avoid a scandal, the agency buried the file. Julian Reyes vanished into a guarded hospital wing, permanently crippled. The war ended before it made the morning papers. Elena stood by the window in a sharp gray suit, hair pulled back, the cut on her cheek healing to a thin red line. Rain slicked the streets below, washing away the grime of the last 2 days. The door opened. Damien walked in, rested for the first time in a week, in a tailored black suit with no tie. He locked the deadbolt behind him. Elena turned. For 6 years this room had been defined by invisible lines. The space between his desk and her chair, the boundary between boss and subordinate, the weight of everything they couldn't say. Damien walked to the desk and pulled the crumpled resignation letter from the waste bin. He didn't smooth it out. He produced a lighter and set it to flame, watching the paper blacken until it licked his fingertips, then dropped the ash into the crystal tray. "The family protocol," he said, looking at her through the thin smoke, "states an operator can leave if they surrender their access." "I know the protocol," Elena said softly. "I'm rewriting it." Damien crossed the room, stopping inches away, his frame blocking the gray light from the window. "No more shadows, Elena. No more standing in the corner while I hold court." He traced the healing line on her cheek. "You burned a federal operation to the ground for me. You drove through gunfire for me. You own the ledgers, you own the secrets, and you own me." Elena's breath caught. I'm not your executive assistant anymore. No, Damien agreed, sliding his hands to her waist, pulling her against his chest. You're my partner, my equal, the underboss of this family. The commission won't accept a woman as underboss. Then we'll kill the commission. It wasn't a joke, it was a promise. He kissed her, deliberate, slow, consuming, a claiming rather than a collision. Elena kissed him back, releasing the iron control she'd held for 6 years, pouring every silent night and suppressed glance into him. When they parted, Damien kept his arms around her, chin resting on her head, looking out over the city they now ruled together. Leaned into his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. She looked at the cold ash in the crystal tray. She had tried to walk away, tried to sever the tie. But as his arms tightened, securing her against the world they'd conquered, Elena understood the truth. She was never leaving.